Good day, everybody, and welcome to this first webinar titled Winning Recipes for High Impact Research, which is the first part of a series of 4 on high impact research. Very warm welcome to all of you, and especially to today's speaker, Sophie Bacq. Very warm welcome to you. So I just wanted to maybe say a few things about ANSES. Some of you are very loyal ANSES members, but others are new or have just joined for the webinar today. The African Network for Social Entrepreneurship Scholars was created to link up social entrepreneurship scholars doing work on the African continent. And through ANSES, we are trying to connect us to each other, but also to offer you valuable opportunities to enrich your research profile and also funding and other opportunities. Hence, why we came up with this series of webinars. We hope that they will help you to frame your research and your publications in a more impactful and effective way. And for these webinars, we really try to bring you the best speakers, and I think we managed. And today's speaker, Sophie Bacq, is really one of the pillars, I think, of social entrepreneurship research. I'm sure all of us have read some of her work. Bit of a bio on Sophie Bacq. She's an associate professor of entrepreneurship at Indiana University, Kelley School of Business. She's a leading scholar in social entrepreneurship. She has taught and conducted empirical research on the topic in Europe, the United States, and also South Africa. Her research has been published in top management and entrepreneurship journals, including the Academy of Management Review, the Academy of Management Discoveries, the Academy of Management Learning and Education, the Academy of Management Perspectives, California Management Review, Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, the Journal of Business Ethics, the Journal of Business Venturing, and the Journal of Small Business Management, which are all A-star and A-rated journals. Wow. Sophie has also co-edited 3 books on social entrepreneurship. She's a field editor at the Journal of Business Venturing and serves on the editorial review boards of the Academy of Management Journal, Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, and the Journal of Management. Sophie, we're very glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks, Philip. It's my pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody. I can't see you, but I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. So it's great to connect with you all today. I hope my sound is okay. So feel free to interrupt Alex if there's something wrong. I'm delighted to be here and to kick off this webinar series. So I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared some slides, and I want to welcome as many questions and comments as possible. So feel free to interrupt Alex as you channel the questions to me.
All right. So maybe a few last words from me, maybe a bit about the structure of this webinar. So Sophie will share with us some of her best practices in conducting high impact research. And before I hand it over to Sophie, some pointers. So while Sophie speaks, you can drop questions in the chat box, and we will address some of the most salient questions when she's done presenting. We have 98 registered participants, so I know it's not ideal. We would like to show our faces and speak in person, but for the time being, we're going to collect all your questions and maybe summarize or pick some of the most salient ones at the end. Right, and then, well, thank you everyone once again for being here. Thank you, Sophie, for availing yourself, and I will hand it over to you now.
Great, sounds very good. Yeah, I think we have plenty of time, and so I'm hoping we can, have as much of a conversation as we can, as we want to. So, slide deck should be appearing on your screen. Okay, so first, well, I want to thank again properly the whole team at the African Network of Social Entrepreneurship Scholars for inviting me to kick off this webinar series on this Monday morning here in Indiana, and for giving me the floor and for the very kind introduction. I hope to be able to deliver on this highly ambitious title, which I told Alex that I love because I thought it was quite sounded very nice. But as I was putting together the presentation, I'm like, oh, well, this is something I need to deliver on now. So I did my best, and I'm hoping to share insights that are helpful as you craft your research and try to make an impact on the field. But since I'm constantly thinking and reflecting, I thought, well, first of all, what does high impact research mean? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then winning. I was like, who is winning? Winning what? So I tweaked the title a little bit. So these are my recipes. As Alex said, like, these are my best practices. This comes from me and from my, my experience as a researcher in the field of social entrepreneurship for 14 years. So I started my PhD in 2006 at Université Catholique de Louvain, which is in Belgium. And I started my PhD on the topic of the governance of social enterprises. So I've been researching and thinking about social entrepreneurship for 15 plus years. So this comes from my perspective. Of course, there is a little bit of the insights that I'm going to share today that come from my perspective as an editor as well, because it gives you another lens as you look at research, at what makes high impact research. I have a bonus slide at the end on reviewing that I want to share some tips about with you all, and I'm happy to talk more about that as well if that's appropriate or that's something that you'd like to hear more about. So what is high impact? That was my first question as I was preparing the slide deck for today. Is this, which as scholars we might think is impact? So that's a snapshot of citations. My citations, I didn't want to borrow from anybody else. So my citations from last week. It looks impactful, but is it what impact means, or is it this? So in this picture on the right, you have me and the research team. So I'm in the middle. You should be able to see my arrow. On the research team, we have Robert Nason, David Grass, and Brad Inn, and then partners from the Sustainable Livelihoods Foundation, which is based in Cape Town, that you may be familiar with. So you might recognize Andrew Charman and Leif Peterson, who are co-founders of the SLF, Sustainable Livelihoods Foundation, and Anthony and Pumzi, that are part of their team. And we are, as a matter of fact, in the Philippine township there, we are supporting the micro enterprise from that lady in the middle. We're tasting and enjoying her peri-peri chicken, and we are asking her some questions about her entrepreneurial initiatives. We are, as I'm thinking about it, trying to make a proximal difference in a human's life, in that person's life, in how scholars better understand what research on entrepreneurship in resource constraints environment is about, bringing some insights possibly in the classroom. That is impact. So how do you merge these two types of impact? Because oftentimes highly impactful research in terms of citations might be at odds with more phenomenon-based research, which might find a more difficult journey as they're trying to place in a top research journal. So there are trade-offs for sure. They don't go hand in hand. That's the word I was looking for earlier. So there are trade-offs involved. But I believe that these trade-offs between having a highly cited paper in a legitimate A or B journal, right? So we can shoot for the stars. I'll talk about that as well. I encourage you to do that, but there's also other journals that are very appropriate for the social entrepreneurship research we do. We can do that with research excellence, but at the same time have impact on other people's lives. So these trade-offs are manageable, they can be handled, and I'm willing to share a few tips about how I can think we can handle these trade-offs. Next question is impact on what? I hinted at that already, but are we thinking about impact on research, on teaching, or on practice, right? So I think the term impact is very broad. Impact is oftentimes recognized as a dependent variable in the field of study of social entrepreneurship and social enterprises. So one more distinction I'd like to make before offering you some tips is the distinction between research excellence and research impact. So research excellence, to me, is measured, to me, having spent a lot of time in academia, is measured by a number of high level. So you can talk about them in terms of A-level publications or 4-star publications in a certain amount of time. In the US system, there's a tenure system. They want to see a certain number of A-level publications in 5 to 6 years. Another metric would be awards or recognition of articles that have been published, or conference best paper prizes, things of the like. The research impact metrics, on the other hand, are the number of citations when it comes to research, but also usage in the classroom. Are you or do you want to think about how you can maybe write a case that can be used in the classroom based on the research that you have done? If you have qualitative research, you've read interviews, there might be some insights there that would deserve to be taught in the classroom. As an aside, we are looking for much more diversity and inclusion in our teaching these days. So when I teach in social entrepreneurship, I try to have, and I didn't do that at first, but now I try to have as many female and as many male founders of social enterprises featured in the case studies I'm teaching. I'm trying to strive for geographical diversity and so on. So I think we need more cases that are based on the research you're doing in Africa. And then impact on society. So this is usually measured in terms of, was your research featured in a national newspaper? Did you provide insights that were implemented by practitioners, social entrepreneurs, or policymakers? Are you moving the needle in society? And again, these are different things, right? But they are reconcilable to some extent. So this is where I'm going with this talk. Of course, there's some research that I'm still doing that I think was highly impactful. It was a working paper with Andrew Sherman and Kayla Brown from the SLF, and we looked at the impact of formal supermarkets on informal micro enterprises in Philippine Cape Town in the food industry. So that was, to me, was impactful. We tried to give a lot of guidance and advice to practitioners. We were not aiming for publications in an A-level journal with this. We were not going after awards and recognition, but to me, the impact is as important. So there are instances where you can reconcile them, and there are instances where I think it's okay and actually very healthy, and I highly encourage you to do both and have a different kind of impact. So I think that's my first point. Different kinds of impact exist, and different papers or projects might be better suited to these different kinds of impact. But in the following talk, I'm going to try my best to share with you some insights on how to strive for research excellence. So these are these APUBs, A publications that Alex mentioned earlier. Impactful research and meaningful. And to me, meaningful is really important. So since we're talking about recipes, I thought I need to make a list of ingredients. So this is what I came up with. The first one is a ton of passion. This is the what. A ton of passion because it is a long journey. The research takes a long time, as you might be experiencing at the moment as doctoral students. It feels like a long, winding road that's, maybe you don't see the end of the road, and actually the road never ends. So it keeps going. You defend your dissertation, and then you go on with other research projects, whether you work at a university as research for policy making. It's a long journey. Research is a long journey. So having the passion for the topic, and I want to say that we're all here in this room because we have passion for social entrepreneurship as a topic of study. This passion can bring you a long way, because you also need a lot of motivation, kilograms of motivations. Beyond what I'm doing research on, which is social entrepreneurship, and I want to send these social entrepreneurs, when you look at my research, you'll see individual level, organizational level, community level research. I'm passionate about all kinds of phenomena attached to the blending of society and entrepreneurship. But you can have, you can have a more narrow passion. That's okay too. That's the what. But then the why am I doing it? And in terms of motivation, to me, what's really important is internal drive. It matters to me because it matters to society. I can see how extrinsic motivations, external drivers, university driven pressure can move the needle in motivating you to get these papers. But at the end of the day, I think this is a long-term, and that's back to my long journey point. This is a long-term game, and I think having the internal drive to actually conduct the research also brings you a long way. So here we're not talking about skills yet. I'll get to the skills, but the passion and the motivation really is what partially makes a difference. So I know what I want to research, and I know why I'm doing it. How you do it? Well, liters of sweat. It takes hard work. So there is no shortcut on high quality research or research, excellent research, as is in my title, slide title here. It takes hard work. It doesn't mean that this is all I do. I do, other things. I have a family. I enjoy dancing. I have my own hobbies. But when it comes to research, it takes hard work. It takes to keep your head down and just do the work, do the reading, do the writing, and I'll get a dose. So it's kind of inevitable. But since you have passion, motivation, that's not a problem. That's my point. ANSES of flexibility, another on the how, and I think now with the pandemic, we know what it means. It rarely goes as planned. Data collection is going to be delayed. You're doing quantitative analysis, you have hypotheses, none of them are being verified. All of that is part of the research journey. So you need flexibility, because while it may be disturbing or annoying at some point, it also moves you forward as you mature as a researcher. And then the who, or with whom, to me is really important. A handful of great co-authors. I'll talk about writing in a little bit. I highly admire and respect solo authored work. So, and most of your dissertation would be solo authored work. But when it comes to publication, I have just grown so much when it comes to being a better writer, a better author in the revise and resubmit process by working with co-authors and learning from them. So I highly encourage that. And I'll talk a little bit more about teams of co-authors as we go. So what I'm researching, why am I doing it, how, it takes hard work, but then with whom? And since, in my opinion, it's all about the journey more than the outcomes, all of that makes the journey more enjoyable. But as my husband, who is really a far better cook than I am, would say, recipes are more than ingredients. I can put the ingredients together. That will never taste as good as his meals. So how do I put these ingredients together to have this meal delivered of high impact research? So I thought about 3 steps, kind of logical, but I want to dive into these 3 steps. The first is researching what kind of research you do and how you do it. The second is writing, so some tips about writing. And then the third one is publishing. So researching, what does researching with impact in mind look like? So first, back to my what. So choose a topic that, I strike that through, because it doesn't have to interest you. It has to fascinate you. It has to intrigue you. So be really, really into the topic of interest. It's one of the best jobs or the best journey as a PhD researcher, I think. I mean, from where I came from, I could pick my dissertation topic. So let's pick something that really, really fascinates you and intrigues you, so that you can go in the long run with that topic. Ask big questions. I really love that book by Warren Berger, A More Beautiful Question. I don't know if you've come across that book. It talks about the power of inquiry, the importance of asking questions to me, it is an art. It's a skill that I'm still honing when I ask questions, when I pose questions in the classroom and in my research essays. What are the questions worth answering and how do I formulate them? I think big questions look like, how do social enterprises engage beneficiaries? We don't know enough about beneficiaries. That's one example. You can pick many others, but that's one example. It's a typical, very specific stakeholder group to social enterprises. They're receiving part of the value created by the organization, but yet they're very oftentimes not contributing to it because they're part of underprivileged populations. How do social enterprises engage them? I don't think the literature has answered it yet. There is stakeholder theory that you can use, and I'll talk about theories as a tool to look at that. But that is a big question. That's what I would want to know if I was a practitioner. I would want to know how to better engage my beneficiary and how to better serve them. So these questions, where do they come from? They come from the phenomenon. These are the questions that keep practitioners up at night. These are the questions that emanate from the phenomenon of study. We had a little chat with Alex as we were preparing this session, and one of the questions asked was, do we start from the theory or from the phenomenon? And even though there's likely going to be a back and forth and iterative process between phenomenon and theory, I do strongly believe that you start from the phenomenon of study. And you all, I'm sure, have fascinating, intriguing phenomena that you're studying when it comes to social entrepreneurship in Africa. I know some of you are in Europe, but trying to think of the scope of ANSES here. Because when you look at your phenomenon, you are going to learn first so much about the practice and what's going on there, and that's going to some things are going to puzzle you and ask you questions. And so then the research process would be to make a list, a very exhaustive list of all of these questions that you're noticing that are coming up from the phenomenon. And then the next question is, to what extent does the existing literature address these questions? To what extent do existing theories answer this question? And most of the questions will be answered, but some will not. And this is where you can actually craft a theoretical contribution. I'll get to it in a little bit as well. If you start from the theory, my point of view is that you'll have read the theory and the books and the related articles, and then you'll have this theoretical lens that's going to decode for you all of the phenomena that you're looking at. It would be constraining your approach to the phenomenon. So if you're embracing an inductive kind of research, right? If you're deductive, doing more quantitative analysis, you start from the theory. But if you're starting from the phenomenon, I think it makes a lot of sense to just spend time in your phenomenon, but also equip yourself with theories that may or may not answer the phenomenon. So ask big questions. Think broadly about methods. So when it comes to methods, I don't know, I'd love to know what you're all researching on, but try to think of methods that may be more, it's not always about sophistication. It's true that most journals these days will not be fans of traditional regression analysis. They're looking for sophistications. But I think the most important here is that you don't want to make any shortcut in quality when it comes to the methodology. If you're going for a modest quantitative, analysis, if it's well done, that's going to go way further in terms of trying to publish this work than trying to make something super sophisticated for which you don't have the data for, right? So I think there's always a trade-off about being realistic and just having a strong methodological section in a paper, because if there are flaws or things that have too many shortcomings, it's going to be really hard for an editor to try push the article for publication. So unless you can go back, collect more data, but think about the time it takes. Unless you can do that, it's going to constrain you in terms of your publication outlets. So the methods, if you're writing or researching for your dissertation at the moment, really spend some time on the methods. This is one of the most critical part. The theory can always change. The findings will be the findings, right? But the methods is part of the article that really needs to be as solid as possible. And finally, in terms of impact, revisit established theories. I think we have enormous opportunities in social entrepreneurship when it comes to making theoretical contributions, because a lot of the theories in management and entrepreneurship are based on the assumption that these organizations and these individual entrepreneurs are behaving in a certain way because they have a single bottom line, which is making profit, or can be looking for independence in the case of entrepreneurs. But the fact that we're introducing societal issues which used to be taken care of by governments and nonprofits and not the matter of business, the fact that we're introducing all of that in businesses and entrepreneurship changes the whole story. It changes the theoretical assumptions. So to me, theory with a capital T is like a toolbox. So theories are like methods. That's how I think of theories. So some fit your context and your study better than others. So try to educate yourself about as many theories as you can. Of course, you'll start with one, but then as you keep reading, and I really believe that reading makes better writers and researchers, as you keep reading, try to equip yourself with as many theories as you can, so that when you encounter a phenomenon of interest, you're like, oh, but from that theoretical perspective, that actually may not make sense, and I may have room for a theoretical contribution there. And so for each problem, it's tool. And so one way to do that is to be aware and understand and read carefully the use of different theories in published papers. Okay, so in social entrepreneurship, I've already mentioned, well, stakeholder theory, institutional theory has been widely used, right? Resource dependency theory, bricolage, identity theory, well, agency theory. I think in terms of governance, there's so many fascinating questions that can still be answered. And these theories have been used to some extent. It means that you want to be careful when it comes to using them again, like make sure that you're looking for something new from the theoretical perspectives, but also it also may mean that there are other theories that scholars have been overlooking, because we each have that much time. So where do you find these more tools? Where do you find these more theories? In top journals, the discussion section is usually very, very good. So the editors will push for high quality discussions, so that if you read the Future Research Avenue sections carefully, I know sometimes we, depending, on what you're reading the article for, you may skip it or just leave it aside for later. But there's some gems in there, even when it comes to tables, like authors who summarize how their phenomenon that have described in their paper can be taken for other research purposes with other theories and so on. So look at some. I'm happy to make suggestions, maybe share with Alex. But there's some papers that are actually very rich and that give you a roadmap of all the theories there. And maybe some will not appeal to your phenomena, but maybe others will. So we had research. So I talked about what you're researching, your methods, and your theory. About writing, I'd like to talk a bit about writing in general. To me, it took me a while to find it, but it's about finding your time. When are you best in your day to actually get some writing done? So I love that book by Daniel Pink, When the Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. The book explains that we're all different and have all kind of different internal clocks. And that's, you know, some people might be night owls, that actually most people are not night owls. Maybe we just wait the end of the day to actually get the writing done because the day went by so fast. So that's also possible. But finding your time is really important, so that you're at your best and you're the less distracted when you're doing your writing. Preserving your time is the second thing that's super important to me. So I once received that advice, and a lot of the insights here are, as a matter of fact, advice I've received from colleagues and co-authors along the way. But writing for a few hours every day makes a difference. So every day, commit to moving the needle on your research paper, one of your research papers, in terms of writing. It doesn't have to be, you know, 5 pages a day. That seems daunting and actually really unrealistic, but cap it to a few hours where your time is devoted to writing. I learned this summer, I read that book from Laura Vanderkam, 168 hours. You have more time than you think. I'm always stretched on time. And so I learned that when I think about my week as being 168 hours, of course you have to account for sleep, eating, and so on, it actually seems like still a lot of hours in a week, right? So if it's 2 hours a day of writing and you work 5 or 6 days a week, that's 10 to 12 hours per week of writing. Out of 168, that is doable. That is highly doable. And I think being, you know, keeping afloat with your research and your writing actually does you a service, because when you get away from the writing, it's harder to come back to it. And also, there's always going to be things in the way. Administrative work. I know all of us have different, you know, situations. You may have a lot of administrative work and all of these short-term deadlines that are really daunting and that you need to get done. And the short-term immediate gratification that you can gain by, you know, teaching a class and answering those students' email. This is all wonderful, but you can really do that 24 hours a day if you wanted to. We all know that this is, you know, this is a lot of work that we have as academics, but we have to learn how to balance that. So writing every day and finding your time in your day. And then that's about the whom and with whom. If you remember my ingredients of my recipe, that also is an advice that I kind of discovered later on. Somebody shared with me, and I put it in place, and I find it highly helpful. Is to share 2 or 3 or more research projects with one writing team. I think our work is highly relational, and as a result, it takes time to build professional relationships with co-authors. It takes time to understand when their writing time, right, is the best, when they're going to be writing in the, you know, on the papers in the morning, is it the evening, how do they like to communicate, how fast are they to deliver the paper, how thorough are they, what's the writing style, you know, if you're writing different sections of a paper, how can you merge that in a highly consistent paper as a result of your collaboration. And so since it takes time to build these professional relationships, it makes a lot of sense to then actually share 2 or 3 writing projects, research papers with one writing team, because there's some economies of scale there that you can actually leverage when you do that. And I think it's a great advice, and you save a lot of time, you have more fun because you get to know the people better and better. And so I think that's one useful tip, at least on my end, when it comes to writing. Writing with impact in mind. So I already talked about writing in general, and there may be some other tips out there that wasn't meant to be exhaustive. To me, I really like this question that comes from Gonzalez Morales' 2019 paper. Am I making a proximal difference in a human's life? That's my impact question. But then, you know, humans can be a co-author, it can be the peri-peri chicken restaurant chef in the Philippines. So when I'm doing my writing, am I making progress so that I'm influencing other people's life? And I think the answer is yes, more often than you think. But I think also that asking yourself this question is actually one step towards progress when it comes to writing with impact. Alex, I saw we have somebody raising their hand. Do we want to stop for some questions, or what do you think?
Okay, there are a couple of questions already. I don't know if you want to tackle them now, and maybe in the meantime, Deidre could let us know if she has something in mind while I introduce some questions. Sorry, let me stop this messaging. So one question was from Sadek. I take it he's a PhD student, and he's asking, the last one of your recipes or ingredients is to have great co-authors. However, is it a red flag for doctoral students if one has great co-authors, which might weaken one's profile, showing co-authors' contribution is stronger in the research? Also, how important is it to have solo publications or having different co-authors rather than same strong co-authors? Thank you, Sadek.
Thanks, Sadek. Hi, Sadek. I know Sadek. So as a so I'm reading the question. Yeah, it's a deep question. There are a couple of sub questions there. I think as a doctoral student, I think the first question is about doctoral students. As a doctoral student, I would focus on doing great work, right? So that's the great research. And, if you're invited on some co-authored work and have that work published, it's going to be a great advantage for you in the job market, right? So as a PhD student, I would just worry about doing great work, having great co-author relationships, right? You want to be this great co-author who's responsive, doing the work. But I would not worry too much about profile and things of the like you mentioned. I know that in the North American system, and I know Europe is different, so take that with a caveat, but in the North American system, once you are, you're done with a PhD and you're an assistant professor and you're going up for tenure, you have these 5-6 years where you have to show that you can publish high, top A-level, publications in these 5-6 years. One criteria that external evaluators will look for is scholarly independence, researcher independence. So if you have all of your co-authored work for your PhD and then 5 years later with your advisor, it's very logical. Like, people may question, like, is it really Sadek's work or is it the advisor's work, right? But I think it's for later on, and think of these teams as very very, to me, I mean, that's how I work, but oriented towards learning. So it's okay and likely a plus that people have different qualities. So oftentimes it's the best co-authors or the ones who you share a passion with, but you have different skills or expertise when it comes to theories or methods. But you may have different qualifications besides qualities, but the qualifications, I mean, part of it is also like the more senior scholar will teach, more of the writing. That's how I learn, right? The writing and the researching process to the more junior scholars, right? So I wouldn't worry about profile. The solo publications, the solo publications, no, I don't. I think it's less and less of an important factor in North American standards. It's important to have some first authored publications so that you're the lead author. If you have always the same, I mean, if you have a super strong team and then you change leadership on the papers, I think that's fine. You don't multiply, teams of co-authors. Like, start with like strong basis, strong research, strong teams, and then move forward from there. I hope that addresses your question. You know my email otherwise.
Thank you, Sophie. Philip also had a comment question. Philip, would you like to voice it yourself?
Oh, sure. I thought I'd just type it in the chat, but I was just wondering, when I saw you presenting with one paper you wrote, which was more practical, how feasible a strategy it could be that you start with more field work and getting to know your subject, writing a more descriptive, down-to-earth, simple paper, and then using it as an insight into asking perhaps more abstract or more academic questions, if you like, because I sometimes feel that when I read papers, I can sense that, you know, these people are not in touch with what they're writing. It's all, you know, well done, and they cross all the T's and dot all the I's, but yeah, it doesn't speak to me. So I sometimes lack that. I find that, you know, perhaps relating it to Africa, I read a lot of papers which are very practical, but then they perhaps don't make the second step. So that's why I was just thinking that it could be some sort of strategy to use for people, you know, starting off rather simple and then trying to move up the scale.
Thanks, Philip. I think it's a great question and a great idea. I think I may have presented it the other way around because that's my bias, so to speak, in terms of, oh, you have this research paper, but then can you write a case study for the classroom, for instance, based on your data? And my bias comes from this external pressure of a clock, right? You have that many years, 4, 5, or 6 to do your PhD, and then you have 5 to 6 years to demonstrate your research excellence. And so there's going to be a trade-off. So there is a propensity sometimes to favor the research project first, but I think what you're suggesting here makes a lot of sense, especially when you do inductive grounded theory work where you have to know the phenomenon first. And I was advising or suggesting to make these long lists of questions, but you can't come up with interesting questions if you don't know the phenomenon, right? You have to really understand like who the actors are, whether they, behaviors, what are some elements of tensions, why things didn't happen as planned. And so when you get to that point, then you can leverage the work and abstract it to some theoretical contribution level. So I think it's a great idea. Again, they're all trade-offs. So I talked about time a little bit in the writing. There's going to be a trade. Don't spend a year doing. You can spend a year or years, but don't spend a year maybe polishing that piece, right? So, I did this practitioner piece, but I thought it was a great idea. I did it. I committed to it. I know why I'm doing it. It's my way of having an impact. So I'm fine with it. But I know that I would only be fine if I could spend, I was in Cape Town for 3 months and I spent a couple of weeks. And then, we had a repartition of work that didn't have me do the heavy lifting, right? So that was my trade-off. But I think it's an excellent idea. And yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I was hoping to be, somebody said like inspiration, but the phenomenon is just so rich and people are looking for broadening their perspectives, right? So African-based social entrepreneurship phenomena is rich to the point that if you manage to kind of, leverage that theoretical contribution, then it's going to open up so many opportunities for research, because I agree with you. Some researchers come from the top down and just they don't really get what's going on. So, good point.
All right, Sophie, there's quite a few questions. I had one more, and maybe then you want to continue or you want to keep going with questions. It's up to you.
Oh, I can take more. Yeah, I'm reading the chat. Okay. I can take one more.
So, I wanted to give a word to Bontle. She's a PhD student from South Africa. Incidentally, she's looking at, because I know her work, she's looking at beneficiaries and participative ways of including beneficiaries. And I think she can ask a question live. Bontle, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes. Hi, Bontle.
Hi, Sophie.
Yes.
So my question is, it won't be directly related to the context that Alex has given, but it touches on that in terms of the complexity of the big questions that you've posed to us. And a personal tension that I've been feeling is we can't tackle everything of the big question right now. However, when you break it in the smaller piece, for me, sometimes it feels like there's allegiance is lost, or something is lost, or coherence is lost with the bigger picture. So how do you manage that tension, and how do you not lose the plot in the process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be, thanks, Bentley, great question. I would be cautious about breaking up the question, you know, slicing too thin, right? Too much, because it's more and more difficult. I mean, that's more and more difficult, but I think I was going to say it's more and more difficult to publish incremental research. That's not true. There's a lot of incremental research that's being published. It's just not interesting. I think we just had we had an editors meeting at GBV this week. We're like, how can we get the interesting work, right? Because there is this tension of, okay, for excellence, you have to be excellent in methods, having this, you know, theory fitting right in. And then you end up with, you know, you make this straight up, and then you end up with having, you know, slice the cake too thin, and then your question becomes, you know, less interesting. So I think editors, I mean, I want to give you hope, but I also want to give you practical advice. I think in terms of hope, editors are really looking for bold research, bold, innovative. That's the other adjective that we focused on this weekend during the retreat. Bold research. So this to me is tackling the big question. So I think it's going to be less perfect in terms of the excellence for research metrics, but it's going to provide insights that are richer. That being said, I don't know if the tension that you're experiencing is related to the one of willing to explain the world. I think that's a tendency that I had as a PhD student. I wanted, with my theories, to explain everything, right? So you can't have, if you look at, for instance, practically speaking, if you look at your you know, the implications of your research, like the way that you've set it up right now. If it's going in 5 directions, that's way too much, right? So it just means that you're still maybe too abstract, right? So beneficiaries, but, you know, maybe what for, right? Because beneficiary engagement is too broad of a topic, but beneficiary engagement, so that, you know, they have improved quality of life that you can measure. I think it's big, it's broad enough, important enough. But then the discussion and the implications will be about, you know, to me, there will be about 2 things. There will be about the beneficiaries themselves. What does it mean to improve quality of life? How do you sustain that in the long run? That would be the implication one. The second one would be for organizations, social enterprises, or for entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs. How you know, what are the entrepreneurial, the strategic mechanisms, the stakeholder management mechanisms that they need to put in place. But I wouldn't go talk about poverty in general, if you see what I mean, right? So you have to think about, what am I explaining? Yeah. And if you think of your implications and you're going 5 directions, it means maybe that you're still, you know, that's too helpful, too hopeful. Yeah. So just, you know, narrow it down a little bit, like 1 level down.
Got you. Thank you.
I hope that helps, Bentley. Okay.
Sophie, I think there is maybe linking to that question. We could answer Lauren's comment or question. How does one balance complexity, big questions, with being concise, writing for word limits?
Oh. Yeah, so I don't think that a big question, I mean, necessarily requires a whole book, right? A big, interesting, bold question, innovative question can be addressed in a 30-page article. I know it is a challenge, you know, to limit 30 pages can be extremely short. But I also know that we far too oftentimes use too many words to say what we're trying to say. So I think, I mean, I've improved my writing just because I keep writing. And so like, okay, I write better just because, you know, it's a craft, and you just hone it by practicing it. So I think you're probably able to reduce your paper by half by just writing in more concise sentences. So that's one thing. And also, I don't think necessarily that you have to, I think that's the tension. You have to have a puzzle that has, you know, enough complexity so that you have something interesting there. But it might be okay. You're seeing the phenomenon, back to Philip's point, you're seeing, understanding, you've spent time in the phenomenon. You're going to see all intricacies possible. All the intricacies don't have to be in the paper to address the question you're asking, right? So when I was answering bluntly, think about, so in my mind, because I've used a lot of stakeholder theories recently, I'm thinking relationship between the enterprise and the stakeholder, the beneficiary. That's the relationship. That's my unit of study. There's probably these beneficiaries, you know, they have a family, they have a life, they have a job. The entrepreneurs who found it, they have an identity and they have a history, but all of that is going to be adjacent to my paper. Maybe that's other papers that you're writing, but maybe thinking in terms of unit of analysis is helpful. Like, what is the relationship, the tension that you're trying to explain? You can bring a third one, but if there are 5 or 6, it's going to make your paper too long, too complex to explain even. So I hope that addresses it.
Thanks, Sophie. Maybe lastly, I'm trying to connect.
Oh, Deidre, yeah. Okay.
Different comments. Margot was asking, I'm wondering how to tackle the chicken and egg problem of deciding on your phenomena and your theory, which one should we find first, and how would you navigate the dance between the two? I think you spoke about it already a little bit. And then Seham, hi Seham, would be, is asking, would the research method in terms of qualitative or quantitative methods make a difference for A-level journals?
Okay. Thanks for this. Hi, Margot. Chicken and egg. Yeah, I think I touched on that. So you're right, it's chicken and egg because it's interrelated. And so it's going to be iterative. And here, you know, when I'm talking about, you know, phenomenon and theory, it's because I'm visualizing grounded theory, right? The theory is here, but it's grounded in the phenomenon, right? So it's more of an inductive approach. In an inductive approach, I think you start with the phenomenon. A lot would say that it's not really inductive, it's abductive, because you do this back and forth. But I try to go and immerse myself in the phenomenon as much as possible to understand it, and have these theories as kind of tools. Like, think of my toolbox. So having them somewhere in my head, but not necessarily decided which one I'm going to use. But then it's going to take a back and forth. Like, you go check that theory. Oh, that's an interesting question, phenomenon. Oh, could I use that theory? You go back to the articles, you read it more carefully because you think you have a hunch on something, but you have to check your facts, right? The worst that happened to me recently, because you can read as many papers, and I'm writing this paper and then the reviewer is like, well, what about this paper? I'm like, well, yeah, I should have seen it, right? So that happens to everyone, but you have to go to, you know, to the literature, making sure it doesn't address, you know, your phenomenon as expensively, and so that you can teach something to the theory from your phenomenon. I would start with a phenomenon, Margot, but I would have on the back of my mind a few tools already. So try to educate yourself on these few tools, and don't do deep dives. Otherwise, you're gonna spend your life reading on these theories that are out there. But know what they are, know their basic assumptions, know the actors, and again, like, use tables of future research avenues from published papers. They're really helpful. Well, I think every editor at top journal these days, to address the second question, will tell you that it's not a matter of methods. The method has to feed the phenomenon and the question, and has to bring something to the table that's novel and interesting and bold. To the extent, I know it's coming up on my slide, but to the extent that, you know, this theoretical contribution, it's not about inventing a new theory. I mean, some of us will, but it's not about that. It's about bringing something to that theory. Otherwise, when you think about it, if you keep applying institutional logics to understanding tensions in social enterprises, right? Everybody's probably read about that in the social entrepreneurship space. It's going to be really interesting to see that applied in many different contexts, many different countries of Africa, many different regions within these countries. But unless you find something entirely new, or the fact that these logics don't apply in such contexts, you are validating other people's theory, and that's fine. That's great. But most journal will be then going back to you and saying, okay, but what's new? You know, theoretical contribution is really what's new. Like, what is out there in your study that I couldn't explain before, right? So as social scientists, how can we move the needle? So I think one more thing on the second question, I think that qualitative studies are more and more well received. People are finally understanding the depth and the complexity and the richness of qualitative studies. The bar for novelty is high on both sides. I also think that the bar for sophistication on quantitative research is really high. So it keeps rising, it keeps skyrocketing. Like, you have to have multiple sources of data, longitudinal, data, sophisticated methods of analysis. So so that's in the top, like the A+, but I think if you have a decent study with a very interesting insight, you can still publish maybe in a big journal and get high citations, right? So back to what impact is. So sometimes, the method is what it is and you did your best, but it's still worth pursuing the publication and having that in a B or lower A journal, depending on our rankings, and having an impact because you're stimulating a conversation. A lot of the bold and the innovative don't happen to be in A journals. So that's part of the conservatism of A journals, because it's hard to bridge the bold innovative with the research excellence. Usually you have a trade-off, but go for the bold and the innovative. There are going to be people out there, send your work, best work to JVV. We're looking for that.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Perhaps if you'd like to continue for a little bit more, and then we keep collecting questions.
That's great. Yeah, thanks. I see Margot said, like, she has a toolbox in her mind. That's good. Now you can visualize it. Just gather a few more tools. Okay, so should I go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So writing with impact in mind. Well, these are, I may have touched on a few points in the Q&A already, and that's really fine. So, asking yourself, am I making an impact? And don't obsess over it, but by asking yourself questions, you're already doing yourself a great service. Like, know why you're doing it. And if you're doing it for impact, which to me is that's the internal drive, right? That's the intrinsic motivation. It's not other people telling me like, oh, you have to do it for that reason. I want to have an impact. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm writing. And also, reading makes better writers. I told you about, reading how, others write, gaining, and I'm talking here, it's not on the slide. And the slide talks about scholarly articles. So I'm going to go there first. Read how, authors craft their arguments, maybe have a few like exemplary papers that you love, and that it's okay to, don't copy the content, but it's okay to, get inspiration from the structure and how things flow. This is really important. A lot of, the publishing process is just being able to explain what you're interested in and what you found in a accessible language. Avoid jargon. It's really hard. It's really hard because the journals are full of jargon. But if you can reduce that, it's going to make your storytelling, in other words. So it's going to make your story easier to follow, and so you're going to be less likely to have the reviewers drop because they didn't really understand what you were going after. So read others' work, save a few exemplary articles in a folder somewhere that you'd like to return to really understand how the authors make their arguments. But the third thing is, like, keep in mind, like, these beautifully crafted publications did not come in the door in the shape that you're seeing them, once they're published. They came in much rougher shape, okay? So it's a long process that involves reviewers and the editor and the authors themselves So use these as examples, but don't think that the expectations are overly or insanely high, because a lot of papers that enter the door of the publication process, like first submission, are not 50% of what they are when they're published, for real. Practitioner pieces. So that's also where I'm trying to also get more embedded in the phenomenon. So I read Stanford Social Innovation Review, like not every day, but I get some feeds to Facebook and LinkedIn. I know what I know what the pulse is in terms of the conversation that's happening among practitioners of social innovation. The Schwab Foundation has a really great website with stories. I was looking for some stories of COVID-19 and social entrepreneurship, for instance. So there are many more, right? So these are the ones that I recently looked at, but I think that's also important to keep your feet in reality. Also read the journal's editorials. When it comes to writing, there are a lot of great editorials. So one is from Lange and Farrer, 2017. So how to really structure an AMR, a theoretical article. And they give you, a full explanation on how you can think of structuring. So you can study examples. I think in this paper, actually, they dissect a few published AMR and say, this is how authors, from that first paper did it. This is what authors from that second paper, and this is what we're seeing. We're seeing like a repeated kind of pattern. Super helpful. Jay Barney, you may have heard about it, has for a while pitched a way of writing introductions, and he actually summarizes the insights in his AMR 2018 editor's comments, positioning a theory paper for publication. And so here you'll see I did extract some excerpts from Barney 2018. He tells you the first sentence of a paper must make this clear to the reader, what conversation your paper proposes to join, what it is about. Back to Bontley, is it about a stakeholder management, right? And so here, this is where you bring in the theory, right? So you can say stakeholder management, so you can have a hint of the theory, but you also have a hint that, okay, what kind of stakeholder relationship I'm talking about? Well, organizations that have a double bottom line and they're non-paying beneficiaries, something like that. So this is like the key in the first sentence of the paper. The first paragraph, he tells you, and I highly encourage you to kind of have a look at this paper, the author must convince the reader that they have been paying attention to this conversation's main findings and conclusions. So it means that a lot is actually played in the first paragraph, but it's really true for the introduction. Like most reviewers make their decision by page five of the paper, because if they can't follow you, they will make the decision it's not worth it. It's just a matter of writing. Your ideas might be accident, right? So that's why it takes stamina and passion and hard work and lots of sweat. But these first paragraphs, the first few paragraphs of your paper that make your introduction are really critical. Great paper here, Barney, 2018, to look at to get some insights there. And also a caveat here, it doesn't need an entire literature review. So don't start like explaining, the world that the literature has already explained in your intro. Just a few sentences and a few key citations that show, okay, that person is up to speed with the literature when it comes to stakeholder management. That's it. And then he tells you even like with what word the second paragraph has to start with, which is the word however, right? So you say, I'm interested in that. Most theories say this, however, in this phenomenon, and then you go on. Okay, so we've done researching, we've done writing, and now publishing. So choose your publication outlets, your academic journals with care. In terms of the fit, like have a look at what this journal has published in the past 2 years. Not that, it has to matter in terms of topic especially, but the kinds of methodology, the style, an AMJ, which is a top, empirical journal, and an ASQ, another top empirical journal, have very, very, very different types when it comes to writing and type of data they're asking for. So choose your publication outlets with care. And as I said, get a sense of the types of questions asked. So it's not really the topic, it's just the types of questions, the theories and the methods being used. So that, you know, again, like it's not either or, it's navigating a fine line between, is there enough like experience and expertise with the kind of theories and methods I'm going to propose, but at the same time, it's novel enough that it's going to be interesting to editor and reviewers. My next point, the bar for novelty is really high. And there's a lot of importance placed on theory. I think it's a fine balance. Like we can't obsess over and over with theoretical contributions where the phenomenon might be super interesting, but the theoretical contribution might be a bit less clear or a bit less advanced just because we don't maybe know as much about entrepreneurship in Africa. So the theoretical contribution might be considered weak. It's just a first step. And we as editors see, so here I'm putting my editor hat on, we see a lot of reviewers always criticizing the slack for theoretical contribution. So that's what Hembrick in his 2007 AMJ paper actually mentions, that some editors use that as an excuse for other caveats and other shortcomings in the paper. So it's important, but to me, again, I've said that during the Q&A, I think novelty and innovativeness, when it's well done, when your method is impeccable, I think it's going to be appealing to journals that more and more need to differentiate themselves, right? So go for the bold. Okay. Still, a little reminder on what constitutes a theoretical contribution. That's a great AMR paper by David Wetton, 89. So, you know, this is not like this theoretical contribution conversation is new in any ways, right? This has been part of the field conversation, the field of management conversation for a while. So again, repeating, so I'm gonna not spend too much time so we can have more time for questions, but repeating a bit what I said during the Q&A, it's unlikely that you're gonna come up with an entirely new theory. You want to look for qualitative changes in the boundaries of a theory, okay? So how does agency theory, which is based on the assumption that the managers as agents are not going to behave in line with the principles obsession with shareholder value maximization, how does that theory change if we're not talking about shareholder value maximization, but rather stakeholder value, shared value, or social value? How does that change when actually more and more employees these days are looking for purpose, and they're not these individualistic, self-interested managers? So that's one, that's one example. When the assumptions of a theory do not hold. And Wetton goes on by saying that another way of looking at a theoretical contribution, the different ways, but one way is what is new and how. So did you shed light on a new phenomenon, and you're able to explain, how this happens? And so you can see a lot of these how process contributions in qualitative studies that have been published about social enterprises. And then why, and why is maybe a more complex way at achieving a theoretical contribution, because you're exposing new ways for elements of a phenomenon to be connected with and in relation with each other. So think about assumption, right? I think I have that in my quote here as well. It's about assumptions. Interesting theories are those which deny certain assumptions of their audience. And again, like, we have a field of management that's based on what type of organization, and all of us in this room are looking at a very different type of organization. So I think the opportunities for theoretical contributions when it comes to revising assumptions are plenty. Okay, so publishing with impact in mind. So here I'm talking mostly about impact on other researchers. So most publications, and if you're, you know, if you're really doing your work, maybe on society and maybe in the classroom, but even impact on others researchers. So most publications have little impact. They go largely unread, uncited. They make no difference. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, what is your strategy to bring that interesting, bold, innovative research that you'll have written with impact to an outlet for publication that will then finally, seeing the light of day, have an impact and influence the work of others. Target top journals. I've talked about the fit and so on, but top journals get more visibility. So that's one big perk when it comes to having an impact. And I think if you have a great phenomenon and great methods and have a solid theoretical framing, and it's well written and so on, everything that we've discussed, everybody should target the top journals. Don't have that idea that I had when I was doing my PhD that, oh no, these journals are just for others, not me in my context, in my situation, in my, with my kind of phenomenon. Just give it a try. Be your best own marketer. So once you have published the article, I don't do that all the time, but I think it's worth doing it, emailing the published articles to colleagues or scholars you cite. I've done that once, but actually it's nice because scholars who cited appreciate that you cited their work. They're kind of curious to know what kind of reason you use for citing their work, where you cited them in the paper, and so on. And so personalized emails go a long way. I think these authors that you see on these publications, they're more approachable than you may think. Okay, so do we want to pose for more questions now? Alex, what I have left is a story of one paper. That's something we had discussed when we prepared, and then super short on reviewing, actually. Super short slide. So what do you think?
Well, I'm wondering if this story will clarify some of the questions to come.
Okay, it's not really long, so I'll try to. I see we have a good, like a short 20 minutes left, so I'll go on with the story. Okay, I don't know what the questions are, but I'll go on with the story and hopefully that clarifies, and we'll get the rest of the question later. Okay. So that's a 2018 AMR paper with Rob Nason and David Grass, who you saw a little picture earlier, and this is the story of the paper. I mean, it didn't start there. We had been working together on this, but I'm putting this picture because the paper is to me the output of a bunch of writers and scholars who are thinking together about a question. So that's why I think, that's a nice picture, but that is even a better picture. And to continue with pictures, this paper started with the phenomenon. We were wondering at the time why Tom's Shoes, a social enterprise, and there's been debates, definitional debates about Tom's Shoes and so on, but why Tom's Shoes, considered as a leading social enterprise, taught as a social enterprise, exemplar in the classroom, in business school, was getting so much backlash on their production facilities being in China, not being sustainable facilities, not being closer to where they were having impact on the beneficiaries by providing these shoes for free. Why was Tom's Shoes getting so much backlash? Whereas Nike, one of the leaders of the sneaker industry, had been embedded in child labor, criticisms for years, but never changed, never changed drastically their production facilities location. Tom's moved from China, 30% from China to Haiti. Nike just kept doing what it was doing with some polishing and good, public relations and marketing discourse. So why was that the case? That led us to the question, so we didn't ask the question in terms of Tom's shoes and Nike, that's the phenomenon, but how is social performance evaluated and integrated into strategic decision-making? Strategic decision-making is most oftentimes explained in terms of behavioral theory of the firm, which was going to be your theoretical lens. Okay, so we're all looking at this phenomenon. Rob Nason had used that lens in his dissertation. So he was equipped. We had 3 toolboxes, right? I know, Marco, you like the toolbox image. We had 3 toolboxes. So this is what is great about co-authors, that we joined forces. All 3 junior scholars, we're all like assistant professors at the beginning of our assistant professorships. And we wanted to understand how social performance was evaluating and also integrated in terms of what are the integrated, meaning what are the reactions, the strategic reactions of the companies when they receive feedback from stakeholders. So this was to give you an idea of, you know, where we came from in terms of the phenomenon, but then elevated that to a theoretical question and then a theoretical paper. The paper we submitted had nothing to do with the beautiful paper that I'm so proud of that's in AMR years later, right? So it was a ton of work, but also the paper is so much better. To give you an idea, we submitted the paper in January 2015, and I won't go through all the steps. I'll have a look, but the important points are: in January 2015, we submit to a JMS special issue on social and social entrepreneurship, societal impacts, and it was a different paper. We're talking about ethics a lot in that paper at first, so still the same phenomenon, different lens, ethics. And we had behavioral theory in the background. And then we get rejected from JMS. The editor said he agonized over the decision, but he had to reject the paper. So we were quite disappointed. We thought we had a shot. It was quite an interesting question we were asking from a phenomenon perspective. Bold and naive, we submitted the work to AMR. It was not as ripe as it could have been. It was not a paper I would submit to AMR now that I know, like, you know, the quality that editors and reviewers like to see. But the editor saw something in it. It was an interesting question. It was timely, you know, it was a matter of social performance. Nobody had really looked at it yet. And so it took us, you know, a few years, and you can see how many rounds. So the final manuscript was accepted in May 2017, so a bit over 2 years. That's probably average. We took about 6 months every time to revise, which is what they give you, which some authors make linger longer, so that can, you know, extend the process. The paper that was accepted was our 5th and rewrite of that paper. I mean, we had a lot of, you know, drafting, but the 5th rewrite. So takeaways: the question was new, it was interesting, it was unanswered by extant theories, and it came from the phenomenon. So look for these questions in the phenomenon. The pipeline, I think I'll just go and finish so that, you know, we can go over the questions. So how to create a pipeline of research, there was one example, but we talked with Alex about you know, how do we manage different research projects? I've talked about co-authors teams. In terms of pipeline, that's one thing I learned at IU is Indiana University. You can think of your projects as falling into 4 buckets, and depending on, you know, your availability, the kind of projects they are, we know qualitative, you know, data collection takes longer and so on. You want to have a certain amount of papers. I'm not going to give you a number. I don't know what the right number is. A certain amount of paper in each of these buckets. And so these buckets are, I'm going to start from the back end here, papers that are in the revise and resubmit R&R process. So these are papers that you've received an invitation to review, and you're currently you know, revising and hoping to have really understood the reviewers and editors' comments so that you can move forward. And as I showed you in the AMR, it takes a few rounds, like 3, 4. Most journals these days are trying to make decisions after 2 rounds so that they don't make you linger with your paper forever, which I think is better. And that's also something else about the top journals. You receive great quality feedback, and they have a process that's much faster and much more efficient than in some journals that take 6 months to give you a no. That's a long time. Okay, so at JBV we try 2 to 3 months. Same for I think AMJ, 2 months. So the ones under review are the papers that they're ready, they've been sent out, and you're waiting for a response. Then you have your working papers, they are written, they're complete papers, but you're still polishing them, putting final touches, maybe having some friendly reviewers reading them. So it's really good if you can have some friends, other PhD students, not only your advisor, but other PhD students or junior colleagues who are reading your paper and flagging you like, I don't understand this, or in the introduction, after I read it, I thought you were going to go there, and then you do a 180 degree flip. Like, why is that? Can you recalibrate the writing? And the data collection. So making sure that even though you're working on these R&Rs, you still have new projects that come in the pipeline. And sometimes you're like, yay, this is great. And then, well, it goes back to there because it's rejected. That's the cycle. And then you send it back, to journals under review. Or sometimes you're there and they're like, oh, you need to collect more data. Okay, but hopefully you can go there directly. But that's one way to think about it. Reviewing briefly, how to become a reviewers. I know that editors do read and welcome volunteering emails. If you can say, I'm doing this kind of work. This is how legitimate I am as a researcher. So try to give a few pointers. You participated at conference, you reviewed for AOM. AOM is really looking for having, reviewers, and that's a great way to also practice your reviewer skills. So you are welcome to do that. In terms of best practices, be developmental and constructive, like you would write a friend, like you're rating your friend's work, like, oh, well, here you could actually improve by, doing so and so, and trying to give suggestions. Once you accept a review invitation, that's from my editor's perspective, make sure you return your review on time, or just, mention if you have a slight delay, which these days is highly understandable, but just don't go, MIA after, because that's really annoying for the process and for the authors. Maybe if you submit to that many journals, or submit like 2 papers a year to journals, maybe commit to doing 2 reviews a year. It's highly, it's highly volunteering based activity. So we're always looking for good reviewers. And one thing, I don't know if people know or say that or talk about that, but please do not share your recommendation of decisions to the authors. So you have a little box to say to the editor, I really think that this paper was weak or strong in terms of methods. This is what bothered me. This is what I think is great. I would recommend minor revisions, or I would recommend a reject. But don't write that in the review itself, because this is up to the editor to make their decision. Okay, and then conferences. That's a quick, I don't want to do too much promotion, but I have a link at the end on the conferences I'm running on November 5th. You can register if, there's a fee of $10. If that's a problem, you can email me and you tell me you participate in this workshop, and I'll see what I can do for you. But that's going to be a social entrepreneurship conference on November 5th. You'll have the link here in a minute. I'll show you again. But otherwise, where can you learn more about the craft? To me, there are different kinds of conferences. There are the mainstream management conferences, Academy of Management, ECOS, the Babson College Entrepreneurship Research Conference. BCIRC is really good too for entrepreneurship scholars. And then I put 2 here that are kind of just now ongoing. There's the social enterprise summit that happened a few weeks ago that I heard great things about. And there is a social innovation summit, that's why I put them together, at Price, that has 2 dates. I couldn't find the website, but I'm happy to share it. So look for those. I think, we're in a collaborative effort here. There's so many good conferences on the topic that, look for those and listen in to conversations and to presentations to see where the current research is going. At conferences, you will hear research that It's not yet in print. It's like what's going to be in print in 2 years, maybe. I took part in this seminar series organized by Rutgers University, Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation. It was fascinating. So these are more like CSR, corporate social responsibility questions. It's different from social entrepreneurship or social innovation, but highly, highly recommended. And the final one is one happening next summer by the EMIS network based in Belgium, but a European network. I mean, I may have forgotten some. It's not meant to be exhaustive. I sorry, forgot some, yeah, in particular from Africa, but there's so many places. And with now the virtual environment, I think it's more learning opportunities. And again, balance your time between doing all of these conferences and then sticking to writing schedule. And that's it. I mean, with that, I thank you very much. So that's the link. I can maybe share my slides. There's a link to the conference. We're closed on, you know, on participation and presentation, but everybody can listen in now because you don't have to come to Bloomington, Indiana to take part in the conference. You can just stay at home and then listen to that day of presentations. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a few more questions. I'm happy to linger a bit longer if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thanks very much. I like your different, let's say, pipelines. It's like a pharmaceutical when you.
It's a whole organization here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I mean, I'm definitely a chatty person, and so it's 11:26 here, so I know we're out of time. But I'm happy to address more questions for the 4 minutes, and then take more time if some participants want to stay on.
Yeah, I'll be a bit flexible, so people, if they need to leave, they can do so. But if we need a few more minutes, let's use them. I'm not going to say that we will manage to tackle all the questions. Perhaps some of them will kind of have a personal issue.
Okay.
But I'm going to tackle those that might appeal to the wider audience.
Okay.
And perhaps let's start with some difficult ones. I think Musingu and Oluwafemi, Joshua, asked similar questions. On targeting top journals, most research I found on social entrepreneurship is not in top journals. I have had to target my reading by searching top journals. What is your experience on this? Especially when researching African social entrepreneurship issues. And Oluwafemi has a concern. We've mentioned Academy of Management Journal and reviewed the Journal of Business Venturing. I realized that management theories are culturally bounded, and these are phenomena that could be unique to a culture. In reality, our social contexts differ. How receptive are these journals to studies conducted here in Africa, irrespective of this possible divide? Can African scholars find their voice in Western journals?
Okay, I'll tackle the last one first.
Okay.
To me, I mean, I am in touch with editors at other journals, but I'm not them. So, but at JPV, yes, you know, it's definitely a yes. And I want to say yes for the other journals. I think we're looking at a paradigm shift. We're looking at broadening our perspectives. If you look at the, you know, at the special issues for top journals, in the past year or 2 years, it's really about, you know, what have we overlooked so far, right? We've been building these theories for 20 years, yeah, on one particular type of firm, and then you're right, on one typical, you know, particular type of culture. And I really believe that, you know, management scholars in these editorial boards are now realizing that this is, you know, this is very limited. So yes, I think they can have their voice in Western journals. Oftentimes it won't be because it's from research conducted in Africa. It will be because the norms of writing are so high that because of different trainings different trainings, different emphasis in one's culture, the authors are just not, you know, trained, so to speak, to write in that way. But the writing to me can be really honed and learned. It's not, you know, it's not something that you're born with. So by reading these articles, you'll understand how the articles need to look like. So I don't think there is a norm on, okay, it's only for North American voices at all, but I think there's a norm for how to write these articles. There's, you know, look at the editorials. You have to start with that, and then second paragraph is like this. There's an expectations, and when it's more of a formatting issue, which I think is a reassuring answer, because it means that you can fix the formatting. So yes, absolutely. And so the first question, they may be in the top journals. What's happening is that the top journals tend to be, the articles in the top journals are not written from a phenomenon standpoint, they're written from a theory standpoint. That doesn't mean that the researchers started with the theory, and then maybe sometimes that's the case, to Philip's point, but the puzzle is going to be mostly theoretical, and they will bring up the phenomenon in the back end, in the way that it's written. So there is a difference. That's why I differentiated between researching and writing. To me, they're different things. So the research can be very bottom up, very grounded up, but the writing is going to be more, you know, starting with theory. That's just how, it's the recipe for writing an article. Maybe we need another, you know, it's just a recipe. And if you put all of these editorials together, and if you read like 5, 10 of them, you will see that just replicate the same recipe of writing. So I think it's more about learning the craft in terms of the norms. And I think these norms are going to be hard to change, because all of the people in these editorial boards have been just trained. And me, I was not trained in the US, but I've been here long enough now that I've been socialized and I know how it works. And so I have that lens when I'm reading papers. So these are the norms. They'll be hard to change, but don't change your voice, and you know, speak up with your voice.
Thanks a lot. Perhaps following on that trail, Eleanor was asking about how to include the literature in your research work. She attended a research retreat, and it was suggested that it may not be necessary to include literature review in the research work if you want to project the quality of your work better by maybe just introducing your topic. So I'm getting lost here. Have you seen the comment? Maybe you can read it.
Who was it?
Eleanor.
Okay. No, I'm not seeing the comments, but
I once attended a research retreat, and one of the things discussed was the need to include literature review in your research work. It was suggested that it may not be necessary to do that if you want to project the quality of your work better by maybe just introducing your topic and indicate which of theirs would back up your research, and then move on to methods. Any issues there with plagiarism and writing style?
I'm not sure about the plagiarism, you know, part of the comment here, but I don't know if it was part of an inductive, you know, qualitative research methods workshop. But if that's the case, there is again this balance. If you're making the point that extant research has not, you know, addressed it, you have to tell us enough about what the extant research is about, but then make a convincing argument that it's not addressed the question that you're posing in this manuscript, and have a way shorter, so you can see some article. I'm thinking the Smith and Bacq 2000, I think it was 19 in ASQ. I can't remember now the, okay, Boeing Before Dual Gods, it's called. And so this one is a very short theory section. It has a phenomenon section, which is really cool, like a context section, and then a short theory section. And a lot of the happening is taking place in the back end, where they say, well, this is what we contribute to theory, and this is where theory can be taken further in their discussion and so on. So yes, I think it's possible. But then again, like back to Barney's recommendation, with which I agree, you want to make sure that the reviewers see that you know the literature enough, right? So you have to be convincing, and a literature review doesn't mean to say ABC have done this, have said this, you know, DEF have said this. It's just like, okay, I'm crafting arguments. I'm looking for literature to back up these arguments. So using your own voice is really important in your writing as well. And there is a fine line to navigate. There's a lot of trade-offs actually in what we do to, you know, to finish on that note, possibly. So I see it's possible. I'm not sure what the context of the workshop, the retreat was.
Okay, and can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry we're out of time, but
yeah, just a couple
yeah,
of
go.
minutes.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think you depicted this trade-off between excellent and impact, or, you know, top journal and interesting phenomenon, being bold and innovative. Is it always the case? I mean, it seems that it's working for you. You're doing interesting things for yourself, fascinating, and it ends up in the top journal. So yeah, I was wondering, is there really that trade-off or not?
Well, well, I think there is, but maybe I make it look like there is, but I think there is. I think it's there. I can think of papers where, you know, we're trying to promote, like, you know, more, you know, like avant-garde ideas. It's not flying. I think it's there because the comfort zone of reviewers is such that they still remain very anchored in, you know, existing theories and traditional, you know, ways of doing research. We haven't sent it yet, but now I'm going to try to send a, you know, QCA analysis, which is more of an exploratory, inductive, quantitative analysis. I'm not sure how it's going to fly. I've seen it in a couple journals. That's possible, but how do you navigate this novelty in methods with, you know, with the rigor that's asked from you? And I think, okay, maybe I'm painting something that's too stereotypical, but one thing it's true, on the research excellence, I'm not talking citations necessarily, but on the research excellence, I think a lot of excellent papers are making incremental contributions. So, you know, that would be the tendency. And so the bold and innovative and making this, you know, great contributions, but how to be excellent in anchoring it in data and in methods and in theories is where the challenge comes to me when it comes to handling the trade-offs. So.
Okay.
But
so
maybe there's no trade-off. That's a good question. Thanks for finishing with that.
Okay. Now I think that for me would wrap it up nicely. I think we're running out of time, and if there's any question that you audience feel we haven't tackled and it was really a burning question, you're welcome to email it to us at ANSES@up.ac.za. Mohammed, can you type that out, please? All right, so thanks to everybody for attending. For me, it was really a great session, very enlightening, a great first webinar. And stay tuned, all the participants, please stay tuned on our website, socialenterprise.org.za. You will also see a call for teaching cases, as Sophie mentioned. Some of our work also, you know, we need cases from this continent as well. The deadline is the 30th of November, so go to the website and have a look. And later on, we'll have a call for teaching materials as well. So, and there'll also be a new website with more functionalities, a members profile, and more. So stay tuned. I thank you once again for your participation.